So we have two main sections in our presentation this morning. We're going to deal with the automatic import and processing of Pallet files. So we'll talk a little bit about how the files flow from the various sources into ProduceLinc and what the typical setups are that you're going to need in ProduceLinc to make all of that work smoothly. And we'll talk about the job queues. I think most of you already know that the job queues are the things that import those files. We'll talk a little about what the various job queues do. You'll know we're talking about multiple job queues here, plural. And then after that first section, we will do a quick Q&A before we move on to the second part of the webinar. And in the second part, we want to talk about pallet creation files for existing pallets, or in terms that you guys would be very familiar with, PI files that come in for pallets that you have already created, and what you should do with them, how the system deals with them, the improved ways that the system can deal with them, and the setup and configuration master data that you need to have in your system to support those PI files for existing pallets. And then we'll have another little session for a Q&A after that. Good with everyone? Okay. Okay, so we start with the flow of pallet files from the various sources into ProduceLinc. Coming up is just a little picture. So you have various locations that pack pallets for you or store pallets for you. And these locations obviously generate files for you. Typical files, PI, PO, running files, PS files, empty files. And for a lot of these locations, you might have either an agreement with the location itself, or you may have a Pallet service that transmits those files to an FTP site. So an FTP site that hosts all your organization's files. But ProduceLinc doesn't import your files directly from FTP sites. We'll get into why in a minute. So you might have, for example, location A and B, they transmit files sitting, that then sit in an FTP site. But the FTP site is not the only place where you can receive files. There's always a cold store location that can't transmit it, or for whatever reason, and they will send you files via email. Okay, so we need to gather all these files from both your FTP site and your email to pull them into ProduceLinc. And that's where a little tool called Power Automate comes into play, because Power Automate will gather all the files from these various sites, and it will funnel them through a set of rules into a Microsoft Azure account. Now, this Azure account that we are talking about is the place where ProduceLinc will eventually find the pallets and import it from into the system. So we needed to end up in Azure. Now, that Azure account is not our account. Each of our clients need to set up their own. It's typically something that your system administrator can do for you. And inside that Azure account, your system administrator or IT administrator will have to create what Microsoft calls an Azure blob. It's the weirdest word ever. But you can think of this whole Microsoft Azure and the blob where the files are stored as a modern day FTP site, if you wish, if that makes sense. Now, you'll notice, Jade?
Sorry, you're
Yes.
sharing your main screen. Maybe share your second screen.
Am I sharing my main screen?
Yeah.
Oh, I am. Oh, goodness. Hold on. That means we're going to have to quickly
Stop sharing.
stop sharing and just share again. I want to share this. Okay, better. Here we go.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Apologies, everyone. We're just having some technical difficulties again. No?
Okay, guys, sorry, and PowerPoint doesn't seem to want to work with us today.
Yeah.
I can just share from my main screen then already.
Just open the file again, shall we? See if that helps. Yeah, but this is not sharing again.
But appreciate.
Okay, I think we're up and running again. Right, guys. Sorry for that interruption. Okay, so we have files coming in from the Azure account via some job queues in ProduceLinc. Now, we want to talk a little bit about what those job queues look like. You'll notice we talked about more than just one. This is just to give you a broad overview of what those job queues are. There are three distinct ones. The first one is called import multiple pallet files, and its job is basically to import the files from the Azure storage account. We will see that we talk about splitting this up into two. We'll get into more details about that on the next slide. The second job is to reprocess your pallet files. It doesn't actually import anything, but it will churn through all your pallet files that are already imported and try and recheck them, validate them, process them. More details in the next slide. And then we have a third one. I know it has a very weird name. You don't have to remember it. We call it snapshot freight point verification. It's a mouthful. And its job is to deal with all your stock files. Now, you might ask why some of these, we call them code units, must be set up multiple times to deal with all your imports and processing of your files. We can have a look at the first one first. Import multiple pallet files. We typically set this up as two separate job queue entries. There are slight variations or differences between the two, but we split it out into one that deals only with your PS files, that only imports those, and another one that it then imports the rest of your files, like your PIs, POs, empty files. And the reason why we split them out is because PS files are typically extremely large. They come in very frequently. We have some clients that receive PS files every half an hour throughout the entire day. So they do have the potential to create a little bit of a bottleneck and hold back new intakes. And then you've got the commercial team and the traders on your case. So typically you want to get new intakes into the system as quickly and efficiently as possible. So that's why we split these out. And then on the stock side, there are also two, but we're not going to talk too much about PS files and dealing with them today. Okay. The job queues can't function on their own. It has got a helper, and that helper is pallet file purpose mapping. So for any of the automatic imports and reprocessing to work, you will need to set up some data, master data in pallet file purpose mapping. Its job is threefold. It's going to inform the job queue which files to actually pull or import from Azure and which ones to skip over for the time being. And secondly, it is going to tell the job queue what the purpose of every file must be. You'll remember if you are in the habit of importing files one by one, where a person imports them, when you import it, you have to specify a purpose for that file. But when the files come in automatically, there isn't a user that can choose that purpose. So you need to set up some rules so that the system knows what purpose to assign to each file. And then its last job or purpose is to tell the job queue, the various job queues, if it should flag the files that are automatically imported for automatic confirm. So it's a little switch. You can switch it off if there might be valid reasons why you would want to, but ideally you want to have it switched on for all your pallet file purpose mapping records, if the idea is to streamline your file processing and minimize human intervention. Okay, let's have a more detailed look at what those job queue entries and pallet file purpose mapping would look like. Now, this is an example of what that setup will be. It doesn't mean yours and your system would have to look exactly like that, especially when we talk about the number of minutes between runs. That's a little bit of a trial and error sometimes. A lot of it depends, I guess, on how many locations you have, how often you do get stock files. You can just keep in mind, set up a job queue to run at intervals of like minutes between runs, like I have done over here. Can be long, it can be shorter. The other option is to set up job queues to run at very specific times, fixed times throughout the day. Yeah. The more important part we want to talk about is these 5 job queue entries and how they interact with your pallet file purpose mapping. Starting at the top, you'll see there's a code unit called 85031, import multiple pallet files. And in this example, we set it up twice. The one's got a parameter string that says PIPO, in short, the PIPO files, and the other one for PS. Now, this is what we talked about in the previous slide, where when one of these run, it will only import certain files. And what those files are is going to be determined by the pallet file purpose mapping. So we've got to get back to the job queue entries in a while. I want to hop over the pallet file purpose mapping. In this purpose mapping, you are going to set up what we call a file name regular expression. It's another weird word, but it's a little bit like your pallet file definitions, where you can specify a prefix with a little dots as a wildcard to say my file starts with, all my files starting with PIF04 must use a specific file definition, or maybe you just have a generic one that says all my files starting with PI. We don't care from which location, what the rest of the file name is. they must be imported for or used in that definition. Now, this is exactly what that does. So the dot after the PI in this example, it's like a joker, it's your wildcard that says all the files that start with PI, regardless of what comes after, we want them to be imported as palette creation. Okay, and we've got some basic examples here set up for PIs, POs, empties, and PSs. So in this column, you specify what the purpose is, whether it's produce order confirmation or pallet verification, and we'll get to the automatically confirm lines in a moment. I want to chat about this import job parameter string. So these are the fields or the text string that will tell the job queue whether to include or exclude files when it fetches it from Azure. So when this top job queue for the PIPO files run, it's not going to include the PS files because the parameter string in the palette file purpose mapping doesn't match that. So that's how we exclude and include certain files. Does that make sense? Yeah, really simple. Cool. All right, and then the automatically confirm lines, if you can disable it. If you do enable it, it will try and confirm your files for you. Again, we will obviously only confirm files that are eligible for confirmation, meaning all the lines are validated, and you know, if it's things that must update, that they're matched, etc. So we won't just blindly, you know, chuck stock and pallets into your system. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the detail of what each of these job queues do and what they don't do. I think it's important that you understand the differences so that you know what to expect from them. Okay. So the import multiple palette files will import the PI and the PO files. It will attempt to, as it imports it, to validate your lines. So it checks against your master data. And if those lines are validated, it will automatically confirm if you did enable it in your file purpose mapping. So it's like manually importing a file, clicking the recheck button. If it's error-free, confirming it. Okay, the second one for import of multiple PS files is going to do exactly the same thing, except in this case, it's only importing your stock files. It will again try and validate it. In this case, obviously also match it because those PS files are typically mapped for purpose, palette verification, so it will need to do some matching. And if they are error-free, fully matched, no errors, it will also try and confirm those file lines for you. Next up is the reprocess palette files. Now, this doesn't import any files at all. It deals with the files that you already imported and that couldn't be confirmed yet for whatever reason. Now, mostly those reasons are validation errors, or depending on what kind of file it is, it might not be properly matched yet. And it will churn through all those files and see, since the last time that it ran, did something in your master data change? Is that variety code that was missing now, has it been set up now? And are there now lines that it actually can confirm? So this reprocess palette files is quite an important one because it saves you a lot of time when there are missing data. Imagine you're importing 20, you've got 20 files that couldn't confirm because in all of them, there's a new variety code that you haven't set up yet, one, and maybe a producer. Now, if you were to manually recheck those files, you would first of all go and look at the errors. Obviously, you still need to do that. Set up the variety code and the missing producer code, and then recheck each and every one of those files. Now, open it up, hit the recheck button, select the lines, confirm it. Next file, you have to do that 20 times. This job queue will basically do that for you. You still have to set up the master data. We're not going to do that for you. It's your data, obviously, but it will try and reprocess and confirm them all in one go. Yeah, so that makes it a little more efficient. And then the last two job queues, the snapshot verifications. You'll see there are two. Now we distinguish between the two with a parameter string. Now this parameter string is not mapped in your import job parameter. This is a very specific text. The one that says verify because that's what tells the system to use the job queue to do your stock recon. So this job, the stock recon one with the parameter string verify, will do the following. It will find the last piece file of every location and it will do your stock recon. Now for your stock recon, it does not require that your file lines are fully matched. It doesn't need the file lines to be confirmed. So this stock recon is that comparison where you check that the pallet IDs that the locations say they have, match kind of the ones that you have in the system. If they say they have 40 pallets in stock and you say you have 30 pallets in stock, you might be missing 10 pallets for, an intake that you didn't receive just yet. So it's that typical thing that you in olden days would have done in Excel with VLOOKUP using the stock files. You can now do this within ProduceLinc itself. Okay. And then the last job queue, also for this weird snapshot freight point verification, we typically set it up without a parameter string. And this is purely to do an update of existing information in your pallet. So it's not going to do this whole recon between he says, she says, location says, stock in the system says, but it will again find the last file because we're only interested in the last point of truth, last PS file for your location. It will attempt to validate those lines, auto match them. And if they can be auto-matched, confirm it, which will update existing information. Now, that information can be anything depending on what you've marked for update in your pallet file definitions. Okay. Right. Before we move on to the next section, we're going to allow a couple of minutes for some questions and answers on the flow of files, setting up of the job queues, pallet file purpose mappings. Josh, do you have any questions?
I did.
Not yet? Okay, don't worry, it's not your last chance. Is everyone happy if we move on to the second section of the presentation? All good? Okay, also. Okay, that brings us to pallet creation files for existing pallets in your system. Those PI files that come in for pallets 1 to 20, and then 3 days later, there's another PI file for the same pallet IDs. And up until now, if you are not currently using our automatic pallet file processing, and if you have not yet tweaked your pallet file definitions to deal with it, on any file after that first intake or pallet creation, you'd get that pallet already exists error, right? So here's the thing, if you import your files manually, you can choose to only bring in that first PI file that a cold store location sends you. But the thing with automatic pallet file processing is if we're going to fetch the files from an FTP site, drop them into Azure, import them, neither you nor us have control over what gets sent or transmitted to your FTP site or email. We simply have to just gather the whole lot and import it, which means we needed a better way to deal with those additional files that come in for existing pallets. Now, we don't want to just ignore them. Most often they are sent for valid reasons. They are typically revision files, or they might be transfer intake files. Okay, so that brings me to a quick discussion on the pallet file purpose versus pallet transaction type. Now, if we do go back 2 slides, in the pallet file purpose mapping, you specify the main purpose of that file. So we're talking about PI files now. So your question might be, okay, so I've mapped my PI files for pallet creation. Then how's the system going to know that the pallets in a certain PI file must be dealt with not as pallet creation, but as something else? You know, if the main purpose is already creation, aren't we still going to get the, oh, the pallet already exists error? So that's why we built a pallet transaction type that you probably have already seen within your pallet file lines. We'll share some screens in a moment as well. So in the header of the file, it's got a main purpose because it's got to start out with a purpose, you know, when it gets imported. So we at least kind of have an idea of what you want to do with it. So the purpose of a file applies to the file as a whole, but ultimately it's not that purpose that's going to determine what the system will do with a specific line. For that, it looks at the pallet transaction type, which is on a file line level. And that determines what happens when that line gets confirmed. Actually, even before it determines what happens during validation and recheck of that line. Okay. So why do we need more than one pallet transaction type for PI files? Well, if you receive a PI file that is a revision of existing pallets, maybe the inspection data has changed or variety codes have changed, we want to know that that is a pallet update kind of transaction. But then there's also the question of PI files that you receive from especially commercial cold stores when they do transfer intakes, especially if you've got some pallets that's standing at a farm pack house. Happens a lot with citrus, obviously other commodities as well. Trucks deliver the pallets to commercial cold stores nearer to the or closer to the port. And that commercial cold store will typically send a PI file for that pallet transfer intake. And that kind of transaction has to update specific things on that pallet. It has to update the location or the current and loading freight points. Okay, so that's why we need a much more granular pallet transaction type than just the main pallet file purpose. Okay, now for the system to know what the pallet transaction type is in a file that has main purpose as pallet creation, we need some information from the raw file. There's things in the file that tells us what kind of thing happened with the pallet, whether it's something that was updated or whether it is a transfer intake. Which means that if you want to use the full automated functionality, especially for PI files, you might need to tweak your PI file definitions a bit. Now, you may or may not have seen a few new fields on your pallet file import buffers, your lines. For some of you, these may have already been mapped. JH has, for anyone that has upgraded to our new major version, already assisted in setting up these definitions in the optimal way. If there's anyone that do still need help with that, we'd love for you to reach out to us afterwards, and we'd gladly help. So this is not a training in detail, but we'd like you to get the big picture of what needs to happen and change in your pallet file definitions. Okay, so I want to talk about the role of the packhouse lot number. Now, in the past, if you didn't do automatic pallet file import and processing, and if you maybe have not upgraded to our major version just yet, typically you would map the consignment number or the intake consignment number to the packhouse lot number, right, Judge? That's typically what you would have done. So most of the time it was the same value as you would have had in producer lot number. But in our new major version, the packhouse lot becomes very important. It now has very specific meaning for the system. So you can still use your producer lot number to map your intake consignment number to, or the reference that the producer wants to see. But the packhouse lot number is now being used for special matching. We use it to find the existing pallets that we need to update for update transactions. Okay. And it has to be unique for every pallet sequence or layer. I know in the industry they talk about pallet sequence. We call it layer because there's another field that also contains the word sequence. All right, so to get this unique, because it's not something that you will typically get in a file as a unique number, the best practice is to combine your pallet ID and the layer from the file. Now, this is a little screenshot of what that would look like in your pallet file definitions in the mapped pallet file fields. You can map the same field twice, but then you have to specify a concatenation order for it. So you've got to say which part comes first, which second. So in this example, we have mapped the pallet ID from position 286 as the first part to make up the packhouse lot number, and the layer number, which is position 44, as the second part. And then we end up with this unique ID or unique packhouse lot number. Okay. Then talking about layer number, this refers to the pallet sequence. I don't think we need to say much about it. We suggest that you do map it. It's very useful information to have on stock as well. Then the revision number. Now, this is where we really differentiate between, are we supposed to create a pallet for this file line, or are we just supposed to update an existing pallet? And for that, we look at your revision number and your pallet transaction sequence. Now, the revision number is something that typically is in any normal pallet file, especially PI files. There's a field for it. We suggest, or it's best practice, to also map that exact same revision number to your pallet transaction sequence. We're going to talk about these two for now. Revision 0 is usually what the first file comes in with. I have seen cases where it's not 0, but typically it would be 0, and that tells the system that it must actually create this pallet. If the revision number of the pallet in the file is 1 or higher, we will treat it as a pallet update. So then in that case, we are going to look for an existing pallet using the packhouse lot number for the special matching so that we know which one to actually update for you. Now, one of the questions I often get asked is, but what if it is the first file for a pallet, but the revision is already 1 and it says pallet update? What's going to happen? Is it not going to create my pallet? Actually, it will. So a pallet update can create a pallet if the pallet doesn't already exist. Even though the pallet transaction in the line will say pallet update, it will actually create the pallet for you. Okay. Pallet transaction sequence, as we said, we suggest you map this to as the same value that you mapped for revision to transaction sequence, because that tells the system the order in which these update transactions must happen. Imagine you have pallet ID A already existing in your system, and you've now imported 3 more files containing that same pallet ID with different revision numbers. But they weren't necessarily imported in the order of the revision. So there's a file with revision 1, 2, and 3, but 3 was actually, for some reason, it got into ProduceLinc before 1 and 2 did. Now, we need to know the exact order in which to update the information on your pallet so that you always end up with the latest truths or latest information of the pallet on your stock. And that's when we look at the pallet transaction sequence. So we will check that if it's trying to confirm transaction number 3, but it sees that there's a transaction 2 and possibly 1 before it that has not been confirmed, it will not process transaction 3. You have to kind of do it in the order in which things happened to the pallet and the packhouse. Make sense? Cool. Okay, and then transaction code is also something that we suggest you map. And this is specifically to deal with pallet transfers. I don't know if you've probably seen you guys know palette files way better than I do. In a PI file somewhere, I think it's in the IC record, yes. There's a two character code that tells you if it's a first intake or a transfer intake. So they differentiate between FI and TI. Now, that should be mapped to a new field that's called transaction code, because it will also tell the system if it's supposed to do a transfer intake or just update, other fields that you've asked it to update. Yeah. All right. We thought about doing a quick little demo for you, 2 of them actually. One probably more related to the first section of this webinar, just to show you how the job queues run and import and potentially automatically confirm a PI file. And in my example, I have 2 PI files for the same palette. So I have a first intake, and then I've got a revision file where we've changed some information. And then the second demo, we will not automatically update the files or import them. I'd like to show you on screen just what those revision numbers and layers and palette transaction types look like in such a PI file after you've imported it on screen. So there we kind of wanted to put the brakes on the whole automatic palette file processing thing. Cool. Okay. So now we're going to head over to BC. Just need to get my block going. Okay, guys. This is our internal test block. You'll see there's currently no files in it. I'm going to drop 2 of them in here. I was afraid to drop them in last night because Josh starts the job queues without me knowing, then he steals my files and I've got to create new ones. I kept them on ice for the session. So if you'll give me a second or 2, I'm going to upload them. I'm going to upload them now. Real quick, let's see. Yes. All right, so these 2, we are going to put through an automatic palette file processing. I'm going to drop them into the block real quick. All right, so there they are. Before we start the job queue, they contain the same palettes. And this first one is an intake, and this one is just a second revision where we've changed some information. I can't even remember what, probably things like brands, size, royalties, etc. Now, you'll notice they both start with PI, and then we are going to head over. Judge can just help me navigate through all these screens to BC. There we go. Okay, and let's have a look at how I set up my palette file purpose mapping. So I've mapped PI files, all of them, to come in as palette creations. Okay. Right. Let's have a look at our job queue entries. These are my 5 jobs for importing and managing files. So this is the one that I need to run to bring in those 2 PI files in my Azure block. Now, I typically would schedule these I'm going to simply run it once in foreground so we don't have to wait for it. Okay. Yes, we do want to continue. Just importing the first one. Hopefully it's confirming all these lines. I can't remember if I ever see these files. We'll see. Jury is out. Okay, it's done. Let's have a look at where the files are. I'm hoping they're sitting in my finalized palette file entries if they were completely error-free. And there they are. There's the 2246 one. That's the first intake. And you'll see it's finalized. And all the lines confirmed. So confirmed there. And other direction. And there's the other one. T280. And this one is also confirmed. And you'll see it is confirmed for palette update because it was the same palette IDs. Even though the main purpose of the file says palette creation. Okay, so that was a really quick demo of just importing 2 files. I know that was super quick. We can say that the importing is very, very efficient. It churns through a lot of files really, really quickly. Getting them from Azure into the system. Obviously, validation takes a little longer. There's a bunch of stuff that it has to check. But I don't know, Judge, in your experience, import of just like the PI and PO files, if they, I know in the past, we brought in like 400 files in one go in under a minute, I think. Yeah, so it's a very efficient engine. And it can optimize your efficiency and productivity throughout the day, we believe. Okay. All right. So let's have a little bit of a more detailed look into the revision numbers, the layers, that packhouse lot number, and how that looks in your PI files if you've imported, especially for updates. And for that purpose, I'm going to import 2 files manually this time because we want to put the brakes on them. So we're going old school. Let's close that. Import single palette file. I'm going to bring in this one for palette creation. Right. There's its my palette creation purpose, and there's its palette transaction type also as palette creation. I'm quickly going to close the screen and just reopen it because I don't like the little preview screen. This always feels a little better to me. Can all you guys see? Would you mind if I zoom out one tiny bit, or let's keep it like this? Okay. Okay. So here are the palettes in my buffer line as they have been imported. You'll notice there sits the layer. That's what the industry or Pagels is typically call the palette sequence. We call it layer. Here's an example. That's the same palette ID. That's the first sequence. This is the second one, 1 and 2. Right. And there's that combined Pagels lot number that we talked about. So it's the palette ID. We typically chuck a 0 in front of the layer. 0, 1, it just makes the readability a little easier. And like in this case, you'll see it's ID 01, and for the second layer, ID and 02. Revision number in this file was revision number 0, and that's why the palette transaction type was palette creation. Okay. That now. Okay. So I'm going to confirm these lines manually, going old school again, because I want to bring in the second file for you. Confirm that, confirm selected lines. Okay, so it's gone from my palette file entries because it now fits in my finalized file entries. Over there, there's file 2300. Okay, all confirmed. All right, and now we're going to import the second one. Now in the second one, I've changed some things around. So these are the, hold on, I want to pull this over. But here we go. That's the first file that we imported just now, for which I confirmed the lines, got some apples, royal galas. Notice these first ones, I count 135s. And the revision number, that revision number sits somewhere around here. So it's 0. This is kind of the first intake, and this is a subsequent file for the same IDs. Looks like some counts or sizes have changed for some of these lines. The other ones were 135s, and it has revision number as revision number 1. So we are expecting this to come in as a pallet update transaction. Yeah, I'm going to import that second file. Still as pallet creation for the main purpose. I'm not choosing anything else there. Right, then just closing this. I prefer to open it from the card. There it is, 2315. Okay. Main purpose is pallet creation. I'm going to put this into focus mode. Okay. So you'll note the pallet transaction type is now pallet update. Because it has revision number 1 and the transaction sequence or pallet transaction sequence, we've mapped that to the same thing, also revision 1. That tells the system to look for an existing pallet if it can find one and update it. And if it doesn't exist, like I said earlier, it will actually create it for you. And it finds that match. You'll notice it's still looking for a match pallet ID and a match pallet lot, but the way in which we find that match is a little bit different than it would be for things like just normal pallet verifications. It uses this PACOS lot number. It's looking for this number in your pallet lines. Okay, kind of makes the matching a little quicker as well. Okay, so there's a match pallet lot and our pallet update transaction. And these are our fruit spec. Count 120s. Remember, they were 135s. Haven't confirmed this just yet, but if we now confirm them, it will update the lines for us. So, by the way, I wasn't actually going to talk about this too much, but there's a nifty little button here that says show pallet lines. I don't know if any of you've seen it yet in your system after the major update, but it literally just takes you to your pallet line list for that pallet ID. So if you need to quickly like check something, like maybe you have a compare or it tells you, your current size is 135 and it's now becoming 120. You want to check it, or you can't find a match pallet lot or whatever. You need to check something. You can hit this button, and it takes you straight to your pallet line list, filtered for that ID. Just take mine out of analysis mode. And this is my ID. I can look at it and its characteristics. Okay. All right. Okay, guys. That concludes the more official part of our session. Are we having any questions and answers, or any questions, Jade, from anyone? No questions from anyone? Okay. If you do think about something else that you would like to ask, or after the webinar, if something comes to mind, please reach out to us. You're welcome to pop us a mail or blog a ticket, like we always say. We'd love to help you if you need some assistance in setting up your automatic pallet file imports. Please let us know. We will gladly assist with that as well. It does sometimes, especially in the first 2 weeks, take a little bit of tweaking to your job queues. You might have to play around a little bit with, you know, the timing, the scheduling thereof. Do you want to run it, you know, at a set number of intervals, like every 10 minutes, hours, etc., or specific times during the day? We'll get you started on a sort of a foundational setup, and then we tweak as we go along. Okay. Jade, anything else that I've missed that you would like to add? Obviously, there's a lot going on in pallet file processing that we can't cover everything in an hour.
No, not that I'm aware of now. Yeah, everyone should just remember it's not like set in stone on your definitions and your purpose mapping, and so we can tweak it a bit if needed. Yeah.
Should we maybe just kind of show them what the definition looks like on screen for a PI file?
Yes.
Let's do that. Okay. Pallet file definitions. Okay, we're talking about typically you would map things like the revision number and the layers and that unique or that combination of pallet ID and layer for the PACOS lot, actually in all your pallet file definitions, surely, not only in your PIs, because you don't want your PI file to say the PACOS lot number is pallet A layer 1, like 01 at the end, and then you transfer the pallet and you get a PS file that says it's something else from another cold store, or doesn't say it's something else. But if you haven't mapped or built that same combination in the PS file, then it's not going to find a match. So you have to be very consistent in setting up those few new fields like PACOS lot, layer, revision, transaction number, transaction code. Okay. So for now, I'm looking at the ZPI, the typical definition for PI files. Here's that notion I talked about, PACOS lot number. There's combination pallet ID and layer. See that 286, that's pallet ID. And then all those new fields, very high field ID numbers, so they sit at the bottom. There's our revision number. We typically make the width of the number of characters 5. We can't imagine it being more than, I don't know, 5 is already a lot of revisions. And then the layer, we map 2 characters for it. The reason why you should only map 2 characters is because, well, that layer number can be a little bit more, but especially in your PACOS lot number part, this can't be more than 2, because in total the PACOS lot can't be more than 20 characters. Your ID, pallet ID, already takes up 18 of those characters, so you've got 2 left to put that sequence, pallet sequence or layer number in. Okay. And yeah, transaction sequence, you'll see we map it exactly the same way as we do for revision number. Now, you should not mark the pallet transaction sequence for update for anything. It's kind of a system field. We use it internally. It's for us. You're not going to see it on your pallet lines anyway, so there's no point in updating it. It can create errors if you do. Okay. And then quick look at the IC record. Remember we talked about TIFI. That typically sits in the IC record. And you want to map that TIFI to transaction code. We can talk about that in another session, another day, but ultimately that's going to tell the system if it must treat that line as a pallet transfer intake, where it will just update locations and things for you, or whether it must also update other information. Yeah. Right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you guys joining us. You must have an awesome day. I will try to make the recording available after the session as soon as possible. If any of you guys would like to actually have the PowerPoint presentation as well, let me know. We can send that on to you as well. Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have an awesome weekend. Hold on. We've got some people raising a hand. Not. Okay. All right, cool. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.